साथियों को मेरा नमस्कार। और आज का ये विषय जो है वो बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण है, जिस प्रकार सिद्धार्थ ने अभी हमें बताया, all about communal propaganda and also the culture wars that we see happening in India. And there's no one better than Dr. Elst to speak about this, because he's even written a very, very interesting book on it. So I don't know if you have read, I have one of his latest books, which is The Hindu Dharma and the Culture Wars. I think if you can see it, Hindu Dharma and the Culture Wars. This is something a must read for everybody here, for all the youngsters, to see what is the state of, looking at a majority community in the country. And today's online webinar, which is Forum for International and Security Affairs, FISA, which is under the aegis of Yuva, Youth United for Vision and Action. The youth is the one who will take it forward to the next generation. And our topic today is communal violence and propaganda, what India needs to know. And Dr. Koenraad Elst, of course, he needs no introduction. One of his books, which you can also read, is Communal Violence and Propaganda, which was published in 2014. Now, with that short introduction, I'll quickly go to the questions. And without further delay, Dr. Koenraad Elst, I welcome you, sir. And so we'll quickly now take the first question. So, Dr. Elst, I think we can proceed. I think Dr. Elst का connection जो है वो फिर से टूट गया है. जी, मैं उनसे वापस जुड़ने की कोशिश करूंगी. Just give me 1 minute. और हमें इसका बहुत खेद है, कुछ अचानक से इंटरनेट में इश्यूज आ गए, पर 1 मिनट दीजिएगा.
गणों को बताना चाहूंगा कि युवा दिल्ली के संयोजक माननीय रजनी जिंदल जी अब हमारे साथ जुड़ चुके हैं, और मैं अब अधिक समय न लगाते हुए उनका अभिनंदन करता हूं तथा उनके उद्बोधन के लिए उनको आमंत्रित करता हूं. रजनीश जी, अगर आप मुझे सुन सकते हैं.
सिद्धार्थ जी जस्ट डिबोर्डेड द फ्लाइट, बस 5 मिनट में कर रहे हैं.
श्योर आकाश.
Okay, in the meanwhile, while we are trying to connect Dr. Elst, I would, Siddharth, could you just share the screen and just show the books on Amazon that Dr. Elst has?
Sure, ma'am. Just give me a minute, ma'am. I'll do. आप सभी प्रतिभागी गणों का स्वागत है। कॉनरेड एल्स्ट सर जो हैं वो जुड़ रहे हैं, उनके इंटरनेट के साथ थोड़ी सी असुविधा हो रही है, लेकिन बहुत संभव है कि 1-2 मिनट में ही वो इस संगोष्ठी के साथ जुड़ जाएंगे। तब तक के लिए आपसे निवेदन है कि आप लोग सभी अपना माइक्रोफोन म्यूट रखें। धन्यवाद।
Siddharth, Dr. Elst is just joining in a minute. I request your patience, please.
तो कॉनरेड एल्स्ट जी जब तक हमारे साथ जुड़ रहे हैं, तब तक मैं उनके कार्य के बारे में थोड़ा सा विस्तार में बताना चाहूंगा। कॉनरेड एल्स्ट जी ने काफी सारी किताबें लिखी हैं, जिसमें से एक जो है वो है डीकोलोनाइजिंग द हिंदू माइंड। ये उनकी एक किताब है। साथ ही तान्या मैम ने आपको दिखाया होगा कि एक और किताब जो उन्होंने लिखी है वो है हिंदू धर्म एंड द कल्चर वॉर्स। इन दोनों बुक्स के अलावा उन्होंने द सैफरन स्वास्तिका एंड स्टिल नो ट्रेस ऑफ द आर्यन इन्वेजन जैसी किताबें भी लिखी हैं। कॉनरेड एल्स्ट जी अब हमारे साथ जुड़ चुके हैं।
Namaste, Dr. Elst. Can you hear us? Okay.
Can you hear me? Can you see
Yes,
me?
we can hear. We can hear you, Dr. Elst.
Okay.
Yeah, now I think it's perfect.
Okay.
Yes, so as I was telling everybody, and as Siddharth showed, these are the books that can be read in connection to this webinar. And also the other book that I mentioned, which is Communal Violence and Propaganda, that is by
Yeah,
Dr.
this
Elst.
one.
Yes, yes. So please take a good look. They're all available on Amazon, and please do read it in furtherance of this webinar. जो भी आप इस वेबिनार में सुनेंगे, उसके लिए आगे के साहित्य को पढ़ने के लिए और जानने के लिए
Yes.
आपको ये
Come in.
किताबें पढ़नी चाहिए। सो डॉक्टर एल्स्ट, मेरे ख्याल से जो आपके कमरे में अभी आई हैं,
Yes.
वो आपका वाईफाई कनेक्ट करेंगी। जस्ट गो एंड टेक अ लुक,
Mhm.
डॉक्टर एल्स्ट। या
It's
जस्ट
okay.
टेक
Yes, yes. It's okay.
Yes.
It worked. Thanks. Okay.
Okay, so right. So the first question that I like to put across to you is the first question, which is, Dr. Elst. So I'll play a devil's advocate. I'll ask the questions in such a manner. So, Dr. Elst, you seem to be assuming that there is a bigger problem with Islam than with other religions. And why is that? Why do you think or assume so that there is a bigger problem with Islam and not with other religions? Could you please explain?
Mhm. Well, the facts say so. I mean, history says so. The one real competitor is Christianity, but there you see the first 3 centuries, Christianity was a nervous little sect in the big Roman Empire. It didn't think that use of violence could make any difference in its favor. It's only later that they start getting violent, 4th century, 5th century. From then on, you get a situation where Christian kings force their subjects to convert and stuff like that. Then the Crusades and so on. But even the Crusades, after all, were a Christian reaction to Islamic aggression. First of all, fully half of the Christian world had been conquered by Islam. Then you had the situation in the Holy Land where the places of pilgrimage were blocked for Christian pilgrims. That in itself, I don't know if this was worth such a big military confrontation, but at any rate, it's not they who started. So Christians reacted. Now, later on, of course, you get many instances of Christian aggression, namely in the colonial period. But still, you see, in the case of Christianity, there is a long run up to this evolution. It's not entirely, well, intrinsic to Christianity. And so that, of course, explains why now it has fairly easily been outgrown. You see, in today's Christianity is rather different from what it was 200 years ago. Now, in the case of Islam, you see that it's an aggressive religion from the beginning. So you see, Muhammad doesn't succeed in converting many people. Then he gets his chance when in Medina they invite him. And so there, then he sets himself up. He starts an Islamic state. From the beginning, Islam is not just a religious sect. It is a political entity, a state, with its own law system. And then he starts aggression, first against the recalcitrant minorities within Medina, then against the other Arab tribes, then conquering Mecca itself. And so ultimately, by the time he dies, all Arabia is in his power. So that's, you could call that successful. That's not something that Jesus has ever done in his life. And then it continues, you see, then you get aggression against the Middle East, against Iran, and then also against India, 712, which is less than a century after the death of the Prophet. They are conquering parts of India. So that's just what happened. You see, all these destroyed temples in India are not counterbalanced by a similar scenario of mosque destruction. So, I mean, I can, of course, give a lot more detail, but I don't know if that's a useful use of our time. But so history tells us that there are many, many more acts of Islamic aggression than the reverse. And we can limit ourselves to the 20th century. Look at the death toll in communal violence. You see, you have the Mopla rebellion, you have the partition killings. So yes, there were some reactions, especially by Sikhs, but mostly the killing was of Hindus and Sikhs by mainly West Pakistani Muslims. In East Pakistan, the killing was more drawn out. You see, there were repeated waves of killing over several years. But so again, you see, Hindus were the victims, not Muslims. Then, you know, you get repeated acts of mass violence later on. So you get a number of riots inside India with 1,000 people dead, you know, that level of magnitude. But that's absolutely nothing compared to what happened in East Pakistan or Bangladesh at the same time. Then you get the Bangladesh War, which was really, according to the definition of the term, a genocide. You see, where the West Pakistanis, along with their Jamaati Islami allies, actually set out to kill the whole Hindu population and some independence-minded Muslims, because in the West, they were not Muslim enough. They were still half Hindu. You know, I mean, their idea of independence, of not being enthusiastic for this state of Indian Muslims, Pakistan, then the fact that they didn't Arabicize their language, there was a Sanskrit-like language, they, at that time at least, even their dress was pretty much Hindu. Women still wore saris. And so to the Pakistani army, you see, these are essentially Hindus. So even if it was Muslims who were being killed, not by Hindus, but by other Muslims, it was for anti-Hindu reasons. So you see, this was clearly genocide on the Hindu population. And that was stopped, fortunately, by the intervention of the Indian army. But so the fact that the killing was initiated by Muslims, well, that's a historical fact. And so that is more or less the whole picture. You can see today in Africa that every year thousands of Christians are being killed by Muslims, not the reverse. You know, I mean, we can, of course, go into the why behind all this, but the sheer fact has to be acknowledged.
Okay, Dr. Elst, now I'll go to the next question, which is, so in that case, what you just mentioned, can Islam not be reformed then? And so that it doesn't pose this problem anymore? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. Well, I come from a Catholic background, and I'll start with that for comparison. Of course, Catholics have quite a history of religious aggression and persecution. And so in the Middle Ages, in the colonial period, this was obvious. Yet, you see, today that's not really the case anymore. You see, Christianity has changed. Like, for example, the issue of slavery. Today, Christian missionaries in India, and especially their converts who try to justify their conversion, paint a very rosy picture of Christianity. And for example, they claim that in the Roman Empire, where slavery was common, Christianity was a movement against slavery. Now, this is a sheer lie. You see, Christianity continued slavery even after the Roman Empire became Christian. It still kept on practicing slavery. The first move against slavery was by the Frankish queen Balthilde in the 7th century, who abolished slavery among Christians. You could no longer enslave fellow Christians, but you could, of course, still enslave pagans. And so the Slavic population in Eastern Europe became the hunting ground par excellence, which is why the word Slav, their ethnic name, became the word for slave, right? So it did not finish slavery. And this has a very solid basis in the Bible, where both the Old and the New Testament condone slavery. Now, this was also used in the 19th century when there was a struggle to abolish slavery. Many of the slaveholders based themselves on the Bible. The abolition of slavery started with the Enlightenment, with the free thinkers who rejected Christianity. So they also rejected slavery. The first ones to abolish were the French revolutionaries. And it's not that I want to whitewash all that the French revolutionaries have done, but here, this merit you have to concede to them. They abolished slavery. Now, then, the more progressive, open-minded churches started getting influenced by this. And so in England, you get William Wilberforce, who was a patron of the mission, right? Who was a very committed Christian. You know, he understood that the age of slavery is over. We have to make it a Christian demand to abolish slavery, because this would be good for Christianity. And so that's what has happened. Today, you will not find a Christian who says, oh, because the Bible says so, I am in favor of slavery. So in Christianity, there has been real reform, and to an extent, this is because of the nature of their scripture. You see, scripture has a number of things. You know, you can be a leftist and base yourself on the Bible. You can be a rightist and base yourself on the Bible. It just depends on which pieces of the Bible you pick out. Then, moreover, for Catholics, you have also the notion that the church actually is more important than the Bible. So the church can also take decisions which supposedly are inspired by the Holy Spirit. And so even if they do not seem to find immediate support in the Bible, they can still be Christian because supposedly they come from the Holy Spirit. So there is a lot of room for maneuver within Christianity. Now, this is much less the case in Islam. You see, in Islam, I think every mufti, every law scholar in Islam will tell you that the basis of Islamic law is the Quran and the precedent of the Prophet, his model behavior. And you can't really go against that. You know, you'd have to need a lot of sophistry to somehow justify going against that. Take the issue of slavery. So, unlike in the Christian world, there was no abolitionist movement in the Muslim world. You know, later on you get propagandists like the founder of the Aligarh Muslim University, Syed Khan, who later, after the abolition of slavery by the British, who imposed the abolition of slavery on the remaining Mughal Empire, after that, he started arguing, oh no, Islam is against slavery and so on. You know, totally incredible, not based on anything. And anyway, it was without object because slavery had already been abolished. He was talking to an audience that had nothing to do anymore with slavery. And so, you know, a genuine abolitionist movement has never existed in the Muslim world. You know, it could not, because the Quran is so clear about it. The precedent behavior of Muhammad is so clear, so unambiguous about this. Now, because of Western pressure, Muslim states abolished slavery. Like the Ottoman Empire was forced by the British in the Crimea War. You see, the Russians were about to defeat the Turks. The Turks begged for help. The British said, okay, we will help you, but you have to abolish slavery. And so that's what happened. And so in the, let's say, European Anatolian part of the Ottoman Empire, slavery was abolished. But in its Arab provinces, it continued. And indeed, it is only in 1962, under international pressure, that finally Saudi Arabia abolished slavery. In other countries like Mauritania, like Sudan, it lasted even longer. Then, when ISIS created its state in Iraq and Syria, effortlessly it reintroduced slavery, and it directed its enslavement efforts against the remaining pagans there. You see, with the Jews and the Christians, they could be killed, but to be enslaved, some they didn't feel ready for that. But the real pagans, the supposed devil worshippers or Yazidis, they were effectively enslaved. See that in Islam, now it's not on the surface. Today, no Islamic state legalizes slavery, but it's just under the surface, and as soon as it gets a chance, like with ISIS, it's back. So you see, the reform of Islam, I am rather skeptical about it. On the other hand, of course, Muslims are not intrinsically Muslim. You see, a big mistake you have to avoid is the racialization of Islam. What I mean is this: if you are born into a certain race, you're going to die in that race. If you're born black, you're going to die black. And there's nothing wrong with that. You see, that's all kinds of people have all kinds of diverse characteristics. But the category religion, and especially Islam, does not fall under those characteristics. You're not born as a Muslim. You see, you get indoctrinated in Islam. And so you are also capable of outgrowing that. I admit, as you grow older, maybe it becomes more difficult, but it's still possible. From experience, that outgrowing your religion that you've grown up in is possible. You see, I'm an ex-Catholic, and it's not so special because in my country and in my generation, leaving the church was the thing to do. And so what was a very Catholic country in my childhood now is hardly Catholic anymore. And so that, in principle, can also happen in Islam. Now, what you ask, however, is something different. Is not can Muslims walk away from Islam, but is if Muslims can reform Islam. Now, I think Muslims can reform their own lives. And that's why you see many of the fanatic traits in Islam are much less in some Muslim countries. The Islam and the treatment of the minorities, for example, in Indonesia is much more desirable than what happens in Pakistan. So you can see that even within the Islamic framework, people have a certain, but it's no coincidence that it is in Indonesia, because there you have a background of Hinduism or Buddhism. And so that certainly encourages the more tolerant, the more pluralistic tendencies. People who are classified as Muslim are not only Muslim. And so they are also, like everyone else, susceptible to other influences. And so what they make of Islam is largely influenced by non-Islamic influences. And so in that, to that extent, you have a certain leeway, but it's limited. You can't grow entirely away from Islam, because in Islam, far more than in Christianity, there is a very clear legal basis, and so you can't go too far away from that.
Thank you, Dr. Elst. And I'll just remind everybody that on the chat link, there are all the links for Dr. Elst's books regarding this topic and many more. Please do go and buy it. It's also available online on archive.org. You will find some of Dr. Elst's books there for free. And as I always remind, Dr. Elst के blogs हैं internet पे, Koenraad Elst blogspot पे. Go and Google and search it, and please subscribe to his blogs. And we have such wonderful scholars and modern day rishis working amongst us like Dr. Elst. Please show your love and support and respect to him by sharing his work on social media, by subscribing to his blog. You'll search and you'll find it. Siddharth will just drop the blog link again, and keep reading his latest thoughts on every topic. With that, Dr. Elst, I'll come to the next question. So the next question that I'd like to put across to you is that now we've heard your side, which is extremely factual and has everything that needs to be told to understand this issue and topic. Now I'll try to get the other point of view, which is opposite to what you say. So this particular group, they say that Hindus are similarly inclined towards religious violence like the Muslims and the Christians, as you said, the Crusades earlier. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, they keep throwing this in our face, the Gaurakshaks, the cow vigilantes, Yati Narsinganand Saraswati's very so-called quote-unquote violent speeches, and of course Sadhvi Pragya, that saffron terror that kind of floated. So what are your thoughts on this? Aren't Hindus similarly inclined to religious violence like the other religions? And the Gaurakshaks and Yati Narsinganand Saraswati and Sadhvi Pragya. Your thoughts, Dr. Elst?
Yes. Well, maybe we can start with the issue of Hindu terrorism. So in the early years of the Manmohan Singh government, you had, of course, a lot of Islamic terrorism. And not only in Kashmir, there was an attack on the parliament building in Delhi even. That was during the Vajpayee government. There were the attacks in Mumbai and so on. Terror was really a fact of life in India. Now already much less so. And I mean, I have never hidden my criticism of the Narendra Modi government, but this at least I have to certainly give them, that they have curbed terrorism to a real extent. Anyway, so there was a lot of Islamic terrorism, and somehow the secularists felt the need to offset the negative impression that this would create about Islam by imputing the very same thing to Hinduism. So a false flag operation was set up. In fact, in cooperation, in factual cooperation, I don't say there was a backroom discussion about this where, roles were divided and so on. It's not that kind of conspiracy. But there was an effective meeting of minds between secularists and Islamic terrorists when the attack in Bombay was staged to look like an Islamic, a Hindu terror act. And so if they hadn't caught one of the terrorists alive and made him speak, then they would have succeeded. You see, the whole thing would have looked like a Hindu terror act. And in that connection and in the same years, a number of Hindus were effectively accused of being behind terror acts that had killed a number of Muslims also. And so one of these was this Sadhvi Pragya, who was kept in jail and tortured and so on. A few of them under torture falsely admitted. It's only later that they could tell the real story. And so this is where secularists are willing to go, by the way. Because this is not just the doing of the Islamic terrorists. This was done by formal, Congress administrators and so on. So that didn't work out. And indeed, in 2019, I was in the West at the time when the election results came in. And I remember I was very satisfied to see that Sadhvi Pragya had been elected. And this Digvijay Singh had not, the man who was behind all this against her and who has never been punished for it, by the way. In principle, it's a good thing that this false story of Hindu terrorism has been unmasked, has been pinpricked, though I'd say that it hasn't made much difference in the narrative. Normally, you would expect whenever secularists come up with another new allegation against Hindus, then they would immediately be reminded of their whole slander operation a few years ago. This I see rarely happen. But anyway, I mean, it's already a good thing that at least the truth finally was put on the table. Now, so to go into the case of Sadhvi Pragya, in spite of her own experience, where fortunately truth has prevailed, where her own innocence was proven, she herself seems to have given in to, well, the idea that something else than truth prevails. So she said, yes, you see, Hindus have to stock weapons in order to defend against Islam. Well, of course, to defend yourself is a legitimate thing to do. Nevertheless, you see, saying this was something very stupid to do, because she should have known that immediately these secularists would jump on it and make the worst of it. And so it entirely fitted in their new narrative that Hindus are preparing a genocide against Muslims. You see, this is the narrative. So you have actual murders of Hindus by Muslims that take place, like, for instance, the 7 people killed because they supported Nupur Sharma, the BJP spokeswoman who had told Taslim Rahmani in a TV debate that he ought to respect Shiva and not insult him like he was doing. And that, you know, if necessary, the same thing could be done about Muhammad, and not even with just slandering him, but on the contrary, with quoting scripture, with saying, repeating what Muslims themselves say about Muhammad. Okay, even that could be done. Well, the people who spoke out in support of her, 7 of them were murdered, right? So while Hindus are being murdered by Muslims, the narrative is that not that Hindus are murdering Muslims, because that's not happening, but that they're threatening to murder them. And all of them, moreover. In the 1990s, I was at several Indological conferences in the United States, and I heard all these serious, Indology professors, Westerners, say, oh yeah, you see, the BJP is going to come to power, and if they come to power, they're going to come down on women and on Dalits, and they're going to throw all the Muslims into the Indian Ocean. Yes. So that's what they said when the BJP was threatening to come to power. Well, the BJP came to power, and they've been in power now for, 14 years, and they still haven't started. There's still no sign that they're going to do this. Yet the narrative is like that, right? And so if Hindus are not careful with their words, they simply play into the hand of that narrative. So, Yati Narasimhananda, who said that we have to kill Muslims, well, I don't know if he said that. Maybe I'm going too much with the press, with what the media made of it. I'm not sure anymore what his literal words were. Anyway, I mean, anything that can be construed as a threat is immediately wildly overinterpreted as saying that, yes, you see, Hindus have murder, have genocide in mind. Now, that is a very silly thing to do, not only because I think morally murder is not right, but, if they don't understand the language of morality, at least they ought to understand the language of strategy. So certainly people who advocate. And so in terms of strategy, if you want people to get armed, well, what you do is to organize a way to arm them. And not, you sit in a couch, pontificating, we should kill them, what nonsense is this? I mean, you ask people who have been in a real war, that's not the way to wage a war, And so I don't think we are in a real war yet. I think it should be avoided. But okay, you see, if you think you're in a war, then this is not the way to behave. You see, it is either morally not the way to behave, or it is strategically not the way to behave. So you see, that's silliness, that's strategic illiteracy on the part of Hindus. But it does not prove a murderous or a genocidal intent on the part of Hindus. And at any rate, it is purely circumstantial. There is no ideology, there is no scripture among Hindus that says you have to go out and kill Muslims. You know, so, you know, even if in certain circumstances these things can happen, and of course in history there have been cases where Hindu armies have fought Muslim armies and in the process, of course, killed a number of Muslims. But you see, that was purely in certain circumstances. There's never been an ideology like that. You know, there's been plenty of persecution of Hindus by Muslims whenever Muslims were in power or whenever they were locally in a power position, as you now have in Mewat, for example. But you see, on the Hindu side, you just never have that. There's never been a time in Indian history when Muslims or Christians, as such, were being persecuted by Hindus. This has simply never happened. So I don't think there is a symmetry. And I think it can also be explained why there is no symmetry. The reason why there is a problem with Islam is self-righteousness. You see, self-righteousness is usually the key to understanding also other violent movements like communism. You see, communists thought that they were on the right side of history, that they were necessarily doing what history wanted. History was going in a certain direction. They were with history and they had to, you know, make the opponents of history disappear. Well, in this case, you see, Islam feels that it's God on its side. So there may be rules for behavior between Muslims, but vis-a-vis unbelievers, there is essentially a position of anything goes. And so whenever it gets serious, they behave like that. And on those occasions, they will throw any norms, any limitations that morality puts on you to the wind. Because then they feel, well, after all, we are Muslims, we are side. So, you know, to us is a lot more fun. So you see, this problem of self-righteousness is what causes so much of the violence in world history. Self-righteousness, I hope you understand the importance of this concept. Self-righteousness is the opposite of dharma. What is dharma? You see, dharma is the sense that you are what you are allowed to do is determined by your place in the whole. You have to take into account your place in the whole. You have to take into account the other entities that together make up the whole. Self-righteousness means that you care about the whole, you care about yourself. And so, as long as this problem of self-righteousness exists, in the case of Islam, they believe what Muhammad said, Muhammad supposedly in the Quran. You see, as long as this idea remains that God has condemned all the unbelievers, that God favors the Muslims in the afterlife by sending them to heaven and the others to hell, but also in this world by privileging them, by making them the power wielders and the obedient non-Muslims as the dhimmis, as the subjects. Well, as long as that remains, you're going to have that problem with Islam. So the most logical solution to this is Muslims outgrowing Islam, giving up Islam. The other solution, you know, in Christianity, it has been tried, is that you reform the religion like so that it becomes unrecognizable, so that it is no longer Islam anymore. Now, I don't know to what extent people are capable of fooling themselves to that extent. You see, as a transitional phase, this certainly is going to exist. Some Muslims who claim that Islam is, they exist. People within Islam who try to reconcile their own natural tolerance, their own natural fellow feeling with the teaching that they've grown up with, that they have received from their parents, whom they love and admire, and so on. So they think, you see, both these values are real. I have to reconcile them. So that exists, that phenomenon of tolerant Muslims. But that goes against Islam. You always have people who return to the real Islam.
Thank you, Dr. Elst. It's interesting what all you note and you bring out the theological basis, which is based in the book itself, the doctrine that it propagates, and the precedents that is set in society, the global powers that are supporting this narrative to continue. And so the solutions you're looking at is outgrowing it from the Muslims themselves, and then to kind of look at a other way around to dilute this until it doesn't remain in its true form as Christianity happened. My question to you on that is, what do you see happening on the, does a legal solution lie here? Like, many people have gone to the court, even Sitaram Goyalji has gone to ban those 26 ayats that preach hate against the kafirs. So do you think that could lead to some of the solution, one piece of the solution? What do you think about that?
Well, there have been attempts to censor the Quran. Like in China, they allow to Muslims to study the Quran, to preach the Quran, and so on, but it's a censored Quran where such verses have been taken out. Now, I don't think this can go very far, especially today, because on the internet you can immediately find the real thing. So this attempt to control the transmission of real Islam can't go very far. I mean, at least the merit is that at least the Chinese government has shown that they take the Islam problem seriously, that they identify Islam as problematic, which practically no other government in the world dares to do. But like the other governments, the Chinese government is essentially clueless. You see, it's a difficult problem. It's difficult to handle. So they try their best. They're on a learning curve, which the Western governments or the Indian government are not. They simply deny the problem. Anyway, but so yes, I mean, and there have been proposals that the Quran should be rewritten. I think long ago, Taslima Nasreen said that. So this is a proposal that regularly comes up. Well, you see, then it's not the Quran anymore. Then it's not real Islam anymore. So it can't go very far. I mean, you can try it, and indeed, I'll be interested to see, how far it goes. But I don't believe in it.
Dr. Elst, one question that is attached to the answer that you just gave. What are your thoughts on this whole ex-Muslim movement that is going around worldwide? And of course, about Swami Prasad Maurya, burning the Ramcharitmanas. And then, when he's shown similar hate versus towards women and all that, what he's claiming that he's for women and Dalits. But when the same kind of things are shown in other religious religion and their books to him, he completely turns a blind eye towards that and is only focused on the Ramcharitmanas. So what are your thoughts on this, the ex-Muslim movement and the burning of the Ramcharitmanas? What are the implications?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, those are two different questions. Let's start with the Ramcharitmanas. So, you see, the Islamic polemicists are not very original. They know their Islam, but they don't know much about other religions. So in this case, the pretense of having discovered something terrible in the Ramcharitmanas, that's only borrowed. You see, they didn't invent that. The Ambedkarites, especially the Christian missionaries, also specialize in this. Let me first explain this Ramcharitmanas thing. So it is said in the Ramcharitmanas that a drum, an illiterate, an animal, a serf, and a woman are fit for being beaten. All right, just like you beat a drum. I mean, some people say, oh, it's a different translation. It means being instructed or so. Well, you can't instruct a drum, but you can beat a drum. So it really means beaten, okay? So that line, Ramcharitmanas, but you have to be pretty silly that as a commandment to Hindus. You see, not everything that is in the Ramcharitmanas is Dharma Shastra, lays down the law. On the contrary, here it is one of the opponents of Rama that says this. Rama doesn't say it. Rama also doesn't do it. He doesn't beat women. Even when Surpanakha strongly threatens his married life, you see, he doesn't want to punish her. He doesn't touch her, let alone kill her, as he's advised to do. Then Lakshman does so, but even he doesn't beat her up, though he slits off her nose. But you see, this is not shown as a thing to do. You see, this is your rule of behavior, not at all. It's a negative character that says this. So it's not Valmiki or Tulsidas who says it. It is not Rama who says it. So it doesn't have a normative value for Hindus. But you see, that is already a little bit more subtle. Here you can't get away with mistranslation. Here you have to.
Dr. Elst,
Yes.
This is said by the ocean when Ramji,
Yes.
he's waiting for 3 days, and then he threatens the ocean that I'll dry you up if you don't listen to my pleas. And then this is the sea that is saying this line to Rama.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So you see, if you read it in context, it's certainly not normative for Hindus. So to use this quote as criminalizing Hinduism merely proves that you can't read properly. So anyway, you see here, I want to whitewash the Muslim cleric. It's not that he can't read; it's the sources that he quotes that can't read. Okay. But so the Ambedkarites and so all those who come up with this line show that they can't read. Now, of course, it is possible to find some difficult lines in another religion's scripture, and I mean, indeed, in their polemics with Jews, of course, they've done that all the time of finding troublesome lines in each other's scripture. So yes, you see, with Hindu scripture, you can try that. And here and there, probably you can find something. But there is a difference in status of the value of those scriptures. You see, in Hinduism, especially in normative scriptures, in the Dharma Shastras, it is said very explicitly that they can be reformed. Someone who is familiar with the spirit of the Dharma Shastras is allowed to reform the letter of those Dharma Shastras. And, of course, this is not something you can do just offhand. There's a certain process of a growing consensus among the population and so on. But nevertheless, that is foreseen. You see, this Hindu scripture can be reformed, whereas in Islam, the idea is that these are the words of God. And so they are valid in all eternity. They are valid till doomsday. So you see, again, the situation in religions is that slowly, they are amenable to reform, and I don't exclude this in Islam, but in Islam it's much more difficult. Now, the other question was
about the ex-Muslims.
the ex-Muslims, yes. Well, I expect a lot from this movement. In fact, I have advocated it since the beginning. What Muslims can do is to leave Islam, is to make a doctrinal statement. You see, here I disagree. And there are two reasons why you can leave Islam. One is you can see all the moral implications of Islam, the self-righteousness that it teaches vis-a-vis unbelievers. You can say, well, I don't accept it. I find this undharmic. Even if you haven't studied Sanatana Dharma or so, but you just feel this isn't right. Because, you have a natural feeling that, what you don't want that happens to you, don't do that to someone else. The golden rule, which you find in many religions. Confucius said it. It is there. Hillel, a Jewish rabbi, said it. I think the only religion that doesn't have it is Islam. In Islam, you have the golden rule, but only among Muslims. So there you have the same problem again. They treat one another as like the real humanity, and the rest is the dregs that, for whom those norms don't count. So the normativity is totally different whether for Muslims or for non-Muslims, and many Muslims reach the age of discrimination and understand that this is wrong. So that's one reason why they want to outgrow Islam. Those who are more reflective, more philosophical, may also be put off by the obvious irrationality of Islam. You see, the idea that suddenly a book appears from heaven that has existed in the bosom of God since all eternity, since before creation, is now sent down through a prophet, coincidentally in his own language. God speaks Arabic. And then it is valid for all eternity. And if you don't have it, either because you live far away and you haven't heard of it, or because you lived earlier than the prophet, like the prophet's mother, whom he situates in hell, then you're doomed. In all those cases where you haven't received this revelation, then you're doomed. Now, if you think about this, this is very irrational. This is not how things go. You have to live in a very small world, like a frog in a well, to believe these stories. So you see, even apart from the moral implications of Islam, you can still say, well, I don't believe this. Like, this is my own position against Christianity. You see, there are a number of principles in Christianity that I find nice, that are good. Like, for instance, not in the Bible, but among the saints, the church father Augustine said that instead of the law, instead of the Sharia, for example, you see, God doesn't lay down any specific law. No, he lays down the principle of charity. And so he said, you should love and then do what you want. Okay, so that means anything that you want to do, that you contemplate doing, that is inspired by charity, that is the right thing. You see, if that motivation is behind it, then it is good. Okay, so that's we can fuss about details, but in general, I think that's a good principle. Okay, Now, nevertheless, I'm not going to say, oh yeah, upon second thought, I'm going to remain a Christian. No, no, I don't do that, because Christianity is a specific doctrine. Do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God, that he was resurrected from the dead, that he thereby delivered us from hereditary sin? Well, I don't believe those things. Those things are what define Christianity. You see, what I just quote from St. Augustine was an afterthought. It is within a Christian framework that he came to this thought, but that's not what defines Christianity. So you see, the defining doctrine of Christianity I reject. And so I have nothing against Christianity. I mean, there are such people who have a grudge against Christianity, often because of personal experiences, a priest who abused them, for example. Now, I know such experiences. I have pretty positive memories of my life as a choir boy and stuff. And yet, you see, I see rationally that this basic doctrine doesn't hold up. So in the case of Islam, you can have the same thing. You see people who just look at, what is it that I intone, to believe in? The prayer 5 times a day contains a kind of a creed, an affirmation of the doctrine. Well, do I really believe this? So that can also be a reason for quitting Islam. So more and more people now have access to all the information, both the moral implications of Islam throughout history in its treatment of the unbelievers, as well as the doctrinal, the philosophical basis of Islam. And so because of this, more and more people decide to quit Islam. And I don't think this can be stopped. You see, Islamic organizations have seized the internet to this extent that they have websites where you can, get all the Islamic information. If you doubt about what to do in a particular situation, then you have an internet mufti who tells you, okay, this is what Islamic law says for this situation. Right. So they think that they are with it, that they have adapted to modern times. Yet I don't think that this will succeed. You see, the church also thought 50, 100 years ago that they were doing pretty well in adapting to modern times. And that also didn't succeed in the long run. So if I now hear, for example, that Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia is introducing certain reforms, they look like just cosmetic and superficial reforms, like, for instance, that he allows women to drive a car, which was forbidden to them till recently. So he may think, I'm not sure, I can't read inside his skull. I don't know what he really thinks, but you see, it's quite possible that he thinks that these are just cosmetic reforms. They are good to please, the American feminist journalists or so, and that it won't really make a difference. Or alternatively, he can think, well, if people only knew that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is really an apostate, because I don't believe in Islam, and I think these are the first moves away from Islam. You see, either of these is possible, but at any rate, what he's going to get in practice is the second scenario. I think these little reforms are the beginning of what is going to be a flood, and then Islam is going to be blown away. You see, that's what I have seen with my own eyes happening in Catholicism. And so even though Islam is a more martial, more masculine religion than Christianity, I think even the Islamic world is going to show that same phenomenon. So it may take a bit longer or not, I'm not sure. because of course Islam is more given to dramatic events than Christianity. And so it has started with a bang. You see, in one generation, it conquered the world empire, whereas Christianity took 3-4 centuries to take over the Roman Empire that already existed, that it didn't even have to conquer. So maybe at the end, you see the same thing happening. Christianity has been in crisis since the 18th century, and it's still not dead. And so maybe in Islam, this is going to go much faster. Though, of course, I admit at the moment it doesn't seem so, if only because of the social pressure. Few Muslims would dare to be seen as apostates if their surroundings are all. It's a typical Indian situation where Islam is in a permanent confrontation with Hinduism. You see, in Arabia, they don't have that. You see, here you have a feeling of, okay, we are in a community besieged. It isn't besieged. The Hindus are not threatening them. But anyway, they tell themselves that. All the secularists tell them that. And so many Muslims will feel, okay, I doubt Islam. I don't really believe in Islam anymore, but I don't want to go public with it because I don't want to desolidarize myself from my family and so on, who are still Muslim. So here there is a certain inhibition against quitting Islam. And yet in Kerala, we see it happening on a large scale. You see there the movement of ex-Muslims is already quite strong. In most Western countries, you have this movement. In Arab countries, sometimes you have it, like in Lebanon, or otherwise it exists informally. More and more Muslims are quitting, but not making a show of it. And so I think that a moment comes when they will not feel endangered anymore if they do make a show of it. So I think that giving up of Islam, that outgrowing of Islam is inevitable and is for the fairly near future. But, you know, having said that, I, of course, understand the Hindus who then counter me by saying, yeah, but meanwhile, we do have a problem. Meanwhile, people are getting killed. And meanwhile, Hindus in Pakistan are still being hounded and will disappear unless they flee to India. And same thing in Bangladesh. And it has already happened in Afghanistan. And so, you know, they are not confident that this disappearance of Islam will come in time, that before it goes, it will still create a lot of damage for Hinduism. And so this is possible. You see, I can't predict the future except in the long run. You see, I know that Islam is going to disappear. You know, what goes up must come down. It's not Sanatana. It started at a particular time and is going to end at a particular time.
Thank you, Dr. Elst. That wonderfully summarizes up this entire webinar. I mean, the issues that we see today in our country, you know, with a certain section of Hindus themselves, you know, standing up against the Hindu religion and, you know, supporting Islam and other such narratives, and the global pressure, of course. And it's funny to see that different versions of Islam, you know, being evident in different countries depending upon the political response to it in their country. Like you see China, and you see countries like Pakistan, and even you know, Saudi Arabia. They are deporting Muslims from China to you see that this global ummah or this Muslim brotherhood themselves standing up, you know, against their own Muslims and voting them to China to be punished. So there's this whole global, you know, money power that also plays a big part. So with that question, I would like to bring the last question up, and I'll request everybody to keep their questions ready as well. So what I just said, coming to the topic of propaganda. So consider the BBC documentary on actually against Narendra Modi. So didn't the government do the right thing by digitally blocking it? Is that a kind of a solution you're looking?
Yes, well, that BBC documentary, of course, is a beautiful example of how the narrative worldwide remains the same. Whatever happens, whatever Hindus do, or whatever happens to Hindus, Hindus will always get the blame. And so with the Godhra riots that started with a Muslim pogrom killing 59 Hindus, and that then when it became statewide riots that still killed quite a few Hindus, even though a majority of Muslims, you see there Hindus are blamed, even where the courts have held individual Hindus, including Chief Minister Modi, innocent. So this is an important fact. In India, you have a fairly independent judiciary, which has pronounced on these events, and so which did repeatedly clear Narendra Modi. For those who say, yeah, but you see, the courts in India are corrupt, they are steered by the government. Against that, of course, there are many counter examples can be given. But in this case, it doesn't even apply because some of the verdicts came after 2004, after the BJP had been in power, when Congress, in combination with the communists, had come back to power. And so even then, the courts cleared Narendra Modi. So the BBC documentary is overruling all that, is overruling even the Supreme Court of the largest democracy in the world. So this, of course, is something about the strength of a narrative. You know, you can absolutely ignore the facts and go very far in this. So this is what is happening now. So of course, I mean, I'm not fooled by this documentary. I see it as just a new high in slander of the Hindus, but nevertheless, I do not think that banning this documentary is the solution. You see, this is very inept. Now, on principle, I don't believe in banning things. I think that truth shall prevail. And maybe you can think of situations where, you know, the victory of truth in the long run is not good enough because things have to be settled right now. But I mean, that's not the case here. You know, here we're discussing something that happened more than 20 years ago. So it's not a vital, it's not a life and death matter now. So, you know, the principle of free speech should simply be respected, especially in India, where Article 295A, that prohibits insults to religion and so on, was enacted precisely to protect Islam, to shield Islam from criticism. In 1927, when Arya Samaj critics of Islam were one after another being murdered. Okay, so the British thought that they could stop these murders, not by stopping murders, but by stopping criticism. And they did so for a colonial reason par excellence, because in England, of course, it was allowed to criticize religions. But they said, yeah, but these Indians are emotional and immature, and if they get to hear criticism, they will, you know, take to the weapons and start murdering each other. You know, I mean, I don't think that this applies. I think, you know, there should be fully free speech, also the right to criticize religion, even in India. But you see, that's a matter of principle. There is also a practical matter. What do you get with such bans? You see, first of all, you don't ban anything, because in the age of the internet, it's very easy to get at the information which they're trying to deny you. Like in 2014, there was this case with Wendy Doniger's book about Hinduism, which some Hindus also tried to ban, or they threatened the publisher with a ban so that the publisher developed cold feet and withdrew the book himself. Now, you see, nothing was done to the book. Another publisher published it. And anyway, you could get at the contents of the internet. It's very obsolete what to do. In this case, moreover, gives in this case to the government. Because you see now, the discussion worldwide is not the record of Narendra Modi, but what Narendra Modi is doing today, namely censorship. And so on top of being a murderer, according to the documentary, he is now also a dictator. And so I don't think anything is gained with that. You know, they should have just allowed the documentary and then, you know, get over it. And meanwhile, draw attention to the correct information. You see, several books have been written about the bias at the time. Indeed, get Hindu professor Rao time to so when not all the time, of course, but afterwards, Nicole Elsie, the wife of Michel Danino, by
Dr.
no,
Elst,
just a
could you
second.
repeat the
This
last
is
two
important. Yes,
two, three
okay.
sentences got cut off. Yeah,
Oh.
please repeat.
Okay, right. So what the government really should do is draw attention to the correct information about what really happened in Gujarat in 2002. So myself, together with the American professor Ramesh Rao, have edited a book at the time with the events that were not complete yet. Not all the information was in, but already it was a first attempt to show what had really happened. Then there have been several books that did dispose of all the information by Nicole Elfie, the wife of Michel Danino, the famous scholar. Then by Madhu Kishwar, who first was, of course, a great progressive and a great critic of Modi. And then she went there on a fact-finding mission, and she saw that the facts were very different from what she had expected, which of course caused her the slur of all her progressive ex-friends that she's been modified. Then especially the book by Manmat Deshpande, Godra. So that name you really should remember, Manmat Deshpande. His book has gone through several editions, so there's a fresh one since a month or so. So it's totally up to date. You know, so if you want to get the full account of the Godra events, that is the book to consult. Manmat Deshpande. And so the government should have drawn attention to this account of the real facts. You see, that is what matters, and that is what the opposition, the adversary should be made to read. You see, these are the facts that they have to deal with, not their imaginary story based largely on agitators at the time, Harsh Mandir and I mean several others, Arundhati Roy and so on. All these agitators came in and drew this narrative to their own version. And so this can be countered, but not by banning this documentary.
So, Dr. Elst, that brings me to the last question and asked by one of our audience, and we'll quickly wrap up because you have to go to Hansraj College for your session at 1 o'clock. This narrative, this presentation of the totally opposite of reality, or in fact, fake news, how does this whole system work on a global scale, on a national scale, on a local level? Who are these people? What is this network that continuously, puts out misinformation, wrong information, and to malign?
Yes, well, I'd like to warn here against the, I don't know, it's the Hindu tendency, it may be a universal tendency, but among Hindus today, you see quite a lot of it. It's a tendency to conspiracy thinking, that there is some kind of a global cabal that has it in for Hindus or for India. And then they invent all kinds of self-flattering reasons, like they don't, India is growing economically and they don't want India to become a superpower and so on. No, that has nothing to do with it. There is about the motives for being against Hindus. Again, there is a certain record to be set straight. The old Christian reason that they're against idolatry and so on, not much of that is at play now. You see, there are still Christian missionaries, and they motivate people like Audrey Truschke, for example. But you see, most of it is not that. It's more the leftist reason. And so leftism means egalitarianism. And so the idea is there that Hinduism is anti-egalitarian par excellence, by which they mean the caste system. And so the knowledge of people abroad about the caste system is usually very limited and very stereotypical. But at least this is one thing that they remember of it, is the idea that it's a extreme inequality. They associate it with slavery. It's not exactly the same thing, but still, they even think it is racial slavery, because there is the Aryan invasion theory. So they think that the upper castes are the Aryan invaders who are racially distinct from the lower castes. So you see, to demonize the caste system and thereby Hinduism, the appropriate ideas are in place, even if they're not correct. So that's the background, the fertile soil on which you can sow these ideas today of Hindu bashing, of Hindu phobia, as they call it. There's no conspiracy needed. I mean, these ideas are just there, are in the atmosphere, and so all kinds of people pick them up. The specific sympathy for Islam as against Hinduism follows from that. It's not that they're so enamored of the idea of polygamy or slavery or, all the things you could hold against Islam, but they see Islam as the minority. And so in America, the minorities are the good guys at the moment. And the majority is, of course, evil. And so this is projected onto India. The Hindus are the majority and therefore they're evil. Also in America, the white majority long ago, 200 years ago, practiced slavery. You see, the victims specifically were the blacks. So there really was a history of oppression of one of these minorities. So they projected onto India. They pretend that Hindus somehow owe some debt, some historical debt to the minorities, which is not the case. You see, in India, there has never been a time when the Hindus have oppressed the Muslims or the Christians. And yet, you see, all this is projected. So you get actually a pretty confused account of what the situation in India is. And on the basis of that, the Hindus are put in the dock.
Dr. Els, what about this George Soros and team?
Yes, okay. I was speaking about, stop this conspiracy thinking. Yes, okay. There you have a good example. Now, you can't blame everything on George Soros. In fact, I've seen a cartoon from the Hindu side where Rahul Gandhi, who of course also takes over a lot of the slander against Modi, where you see him as a puppet and Soros as the puppeteer. To some extent, this is correct, namely that, Rahul Gandhi isn't a deep thinker. You see, he gets the ideas from others and then he, puts them in his political discourse. The others are not necessarily Soros, though. And you have to be also very careful with this imagery because you see, Adolf Hitler, who is of course always used to conclude political polemics. This is the ultimate trump card. If you can associate it with Adolf Hitler, but it so happens that he said that the Jews were thread pullers. That the Jews are not showing up like on a battlefield. The First World War, you had the English fighting the Germans and vice versa. But you see, the arms magnates, the arms sellers and so on, who were selling to both parties and making plenty of money out of the misery of all these boys dying in Flanders fields. So there the idea was these were the Jews. It's the Jews who pull the threads. It's the Jews who make the great powers make war amongst each other so that they can, make money out of it. So Soros himself being a Jew, although not a very innocent Jew during the Second World War, but he was a kind of collaborator who, had his own way of surviving the war, let's say. But so I would avoid this imagery of a thread puller. You see, the problem with Soros is not so much that he's a thread puller. And anyway, in this case, it's only fairly late that he jumped on the Hindu bashing bandwagon. Hindu bashing has been going on for decades. And it's only recently that he said, yes, you see, I declare war on Narendra Modi and on nationalism in general. So yes, now people paid by him are also active in the anti-Modi crusade. But the anti-Modi crusade has been going on for a very long time. And the secularists really didn't need Soros for that. So you see, Soros is one among them, okay, but not more. I would certainly not overestimate his importance. And I really think that, cartoons and jokes and so on about Soros as the evil genius behind the Hindu bashing are quite misconceived. And so they draw your attention away from what should really be addressed.
What is your parting message to everybody and to the Hindus and everybody to win these culture wars and this communal propaganda to overcome it? What is your message to the youth, to the Hindus, and to people in general? What should be done? What is the solution? And what should we move towards?
Well, try dharma. If you want a solution, look at the mistakes that Hindus make. You see, these mistakes are really mistakes against dharma. Like, for example, we mentioned this Yati Narasimhananda threatening the Muslims with violence. Well, I don't know if the sages of yore would have done that. It's morally questionable. It's strategically very ineffective or even counterproductive. That should just not be done. I mean, there are simple virtues like courage, like patience, like truthfulness, very important. You see, if you follow those, you already come a very long way. You see, a great problem with the other side is simply their lies. I mean, what's this BBC documentary? It's lies about Narendra Modi. And so you don't counter that by more lies. I mean, this is important to say because regularly I hear Hindu militants say, yeah, but you see this truth, I mean, that's not practical, once in a while you just have to, say the things that get people moved, that can motivate people. Well, I don't think so. I don't think so. In the long run, uh, this will work out negatively. So, this is very important. I mean, we can, of course, then in a second move, discuss the details of strategy and so on. But this principle of you have to hold on to Dharma is very important. So defending Dharma does not just mean uh, putting up a confrontation with Muslims or so. First of all, it means upholding Dharma. It means following Dharma. And that already goes a long way.
Thank you so much, Dr. Elst. So we've taken away so much from this webinar and understood that, I mean, what I've understood is that knowledge dispels darkness and truth dispels lies. So I would request everybody, as youth, as young people, please read Dr. Elst's work and all the other scholars who are speaking on Islam and other such issues. Read their work and, kind of advocate it and pass it on to others, and yourselves read their works. And on social media you can write your own blogs, you can your own YouTube channels, you can in your circle you have discussions. So keep passing on this knowledge and this on the ground level as citizens, and of course keep putting pressure on the government through various channels available to stand up for dharma, for your rights and for equal rights to Hindus. And we'll definitely see the dispelling of darkness and untruth with knowledge, with dharma, and with the truth. I thank you so much, Dr. Elst, for joining us. And Siddharth, over to you. Sorry for taking up a little more time. Really sorry. Thank you.
Absolutely no problem, ma'am. It was our pleasure. I'll take this opportunity to thank our expert speaker for this session, Dr. Koenraad Elst, and Tanya Brahmvadni, ma'am, for this highly informative session on communal violence and propaganda, what India needs to do now. Certainly, the topic is something Bharat and Bharatiya people must understand about. And I sincerely hope that all the participants attending us today must have learned immensely from this. We from FISA thank Koenraad sir for his great presentation over the subject. I will also like to thank our Yuva Delhi convener, Mr. Rajiv Jindalji, who has not only helped establish FISA but also guides us every time during organization of such an event. I thank all the participants as well for asking their relevant questions. And with these words on the behalf of FISA team, I'd like to express our sincere thanks to all the academicians and students who have joined us today. We express our heartfelt gratitude once again to both of you, Koenraad sir and Tanya ma'am, for taking out time from your busy schedule for making this session possible in the first place. And for the benefit of our participants, I'll again like to show the books of Dr. Koenraad Elst, sir, and he has a wonderful blog also running, and the link was already shared in the chat. So I'll also like to request our participants to go through the wonderful blog Koenraad Elst, sir, runs. With your due permission now, sir and ma'am, we can bring this session to a close. Thank you. Thank you to all the participants. Thank you, Koenraad sir, Tanya ma'am. Namaskar.